Thanks very much. Okay, like many other speakers in this event, I'm going to base my contribution on my own experience in my own territory, the UK. And I'm conscious in doing that compared to other places that we've heard about here, the UK is not experiencing the levels of poverty or the level of sort of seismic political disruption that many of the territories we've heard about have experienced. Nevertheless, this relatively stable, relatively wealthy country is subject to the same forces that are influencing all other territories at the moment. Globalization and neoliberal governance, digitization and populism have affected us as they have everywhere else. And we've had, I don't know if you're aware, but we've had a little local difficulty in the UK recently called Brexit. And many have complained that Brexit was characterized by fake news, as we've just been hearing, dominated, in fact, by fake news, as part of a populist campaign that, in classic style, appealed to anti-establishmentism, an account of the nation as homogeneous against the othering of migrants, and the claim to get close to the people, to represent their views and their interests, the classic mix of populist political rhetoric. And many commentators and most academics were shocked by the result. I think many of us were. And with good reason. The UK has a long tradition of tolerance and parliamentary democracy, a sustained welfare state with strong commitment to social policy, and boasts an exemplary system of public service broadcasting, typified by the BBC. Yet, we were vulnerable to the disruptive and destabilizing influence of populism in this very important vote. And some felt that the Remain team, for sure, ran a poor campaign. The presidential leadership style of David Cameron, the Prime Minister leading the campaign, had a lot of backlash, produced a lot of backlash. The disciplined focus on the discussion of economic policy matters and the failure to engage with real public concerns about issues related to migration and sovereignty was a failure of the campaign. And the strategy of using negative campaigning against political opponents also backfired. So much so that the Remain campaign was beautifully characterized as the sort of politics of fear by the opposition, very effectively so. And many also, as well as blaming the failures of blaming the failures of the Remain campaign, blame the media, who seem to participate in the drama of the Brexit campaign. And for many did not do enough to counter the hyperbolic and false claims that we've been hearing about, made by both sides. And nor did the media appear to be offering sufficient fact-checking or independent critical commentary. The lack of commentary was particularly stark. So that many voters felt ill-informed, and this was repeatedly said by, if you listen to speaking heads during the Brexit campaign, people did not know on the basis of which what they were voting. They didn't understand the issues and so on. Ill-informed and ill-served, therefore, by both politicians and the media. The public generally came out of the campaigning feeling that they'd been let down by both politics and the media. Even the BBC appeared to have been caught by surprise by the way the campaign unfolded. And indeed, academic analysis of the BBC's coverage supports this. Recently, a group of prominent UK academics made their criticisms known to the BBC in a report and in a meeting with the BBC, aiming to bring it to account and to encourage more robust, more critical, more factual coverage in the future, a bit like bolting the door after the horse has run. I was part of that group, and I do think that the BBC could do better, sure, but on reflection, I wonder if the performance of the BBC reflects more serious questions about the role of public service broadcasting in the face of populism and the kind of coverage that we've been hearing about in the first talks. So extensive analysis of the voting patterns on the referendum have revealed some uncomfortable truths. Older citizens in parts of the country that were characterized by post-industrial economic decline were more likely to vote Leave, And that was true for people on both sides of the political divide in the UK, the sort of Conservative and Labour divide, the left and the right. And younger voters, who were much more likely to incline to vote Remain, were far more likely to abstain. They were the lowest group in terms of representation, in terms of voting in this. In fact, ironically, if they'd voted in similar numbers to their sort of older peers, then the result would have gone the other way, most probably. Now, I want to suggest that for these two groups, that the intersection between populism and the media works in different ways, or worked in different ways in the Brexit campaign. For the older voters, the scenario that we heard in the first talk pretty much characterises their experience. Living in post-industrial settings, populism had an understandable appeal to them. They felt remote from their more affluent, cosmopolitan peers in London, let down by the establishment politicians. They felt that the traditions they'd grown up with, a strong, independent, and affluent nation, had been lost, and they were ready to blame the EU and migrants for these things. They were ready to receive the messages of populism, in other words. But what of the young? How can we? I don't think we can characterize them in the same way. Why did they abstain? Now, there's a long history of abstinence from political process by young people, but I think that this context raises new kinds of questions. This is not political apathy, I don't think, but it has to be understood in different ways. Here's something more subtle is potentially in play, related to both the salience of diminished future life chances compared to their parents, and the changing modalities of political culture. Understood, I'm going to characterize it as the digital popular and distinguish that from populism as we've been understanding it in the generic sense. And the politics of the digital popular reflect the idioms of new protest movements and events. The well-known list, the Spanish Indignados, the Occupy movement, the Egyptian 25th of January revolution. What this puts into play is a new political culture that's immersed in the intersections of digital culture. And the tropes of this digital popular, as opposed to the tropes of the popular that we've all been talking about, include the formation of emotional publics, ephemeral connections. Instead of collectivity in political concerns, we're moving to connectivity. People are looking for interesting causes to back, and they will join them in this rather free-floating sort of way, rather than building collectives in the traditional sense. Memes, macro images, Guy Fawkes maths all capture this sort of very interesting mixture of affect-based appeal and ephemeral connection in this sort of environment. But it's not to be understood as apolitical. Many times populism is characterized as non-politics or anti-politics or apolitics. I think that's not the right way to think about this new digital popular. It has a counter-hegemonic feel to it. It's against the grain, is very much a part of it. It's against the grain of austerity. It's against the grain of the establishments. It's against the grain of traditional notions of collective forms of politics. It's against the grain of all of this. All of this makes traditional campaigning and the political questions that surrounded the Brexit campaign, as an example, seem rather irrelevant to this sort of dynamic, fluid form of political digital culture. Disconnected, yeah. And in this context, the BBC itself, I would suggest, began to appear like a media monolith. The BBC was part of the establishment, or could be understood as part of the establishment from this perspective, not reflecting this sort of fluidity and this form of political engagement. And a key part of that, I think, and why it was so easy, in a sense, to connect the BBC to the establishment, actually for both of the groups that I've been talking about, interestingly, is that in a sense it suggests that the BBC, and its great traditions and the way that that's linked to sort of to liberal democratic values, is finding it very difficult to adapt and to embrace these new currents of political culture, and it was and struggled. So, why is this? It suggests that we need a new analysis of public value of the media, and a new understanding of political communication that takes account of these new conditions. So this is in one sense, we need an analysis of public service broadcasting as we understand it now and as it functions now. And then we need to sort of think about what the possibilities are for public value in this new digital media culture. So the BBC, as it exists, its codes of practice reflect an earlier political context. The BBC was formed through its role in post-war national reconstruction, in its role in forming the nation and establishing the conditions for a sort of viable liberal democracy. In the 1950s, the main political debates were between those who support, for formulations of liberal democracy, that is, were between those who argued for pluralism, an understanding of politics as a competitive groups, each all fighting for political support, and that what was needed, therefore, from a public broadcaster was a notion of a balance of reporting, to make sure that the different interests that were competing for a voice could be heard. That's the very basic principle of one core principles of factual broadcasting in institutions like the BBC is balance of reporting. Can we make sure that we do? Now, it's clear to see that that notion of balance is not going to guide us when we come to a situation like the explosion of populism and this new kind of ephemeral, affective allegiances of digital culture. What is balance in that sort of concept? And that's the main concept that they use. And the other thing was that the BBC was part of the establishment. It was part of the elite. It was there to provide an independent view based on expertise, and that was its role. It addressed the public, in other words, as well as a mass. Now, what I think is happening in these, this new configuration, if you like, is that a new political culture that gives a new reading and a new understanding of the individual. The individual is to be understood in terms of demanding and expecting a degree of political autonomy. And what we might ask a public service broadcaster to do, therefore, is just to do two things. First, rethink their relation to the public, not to address them as a mass, not to address them from that position of disseminating expertise or knowledge, not trying to find a balance between competing interests, but instead to address, support, and sustain the new emergent forms of political autonomy amongst citizens and embrace more innovative forms of political engagement and political participation. Thank you.